Dan Spalinger. I am the VP of Global Advisory Services here at Infinicept. I have served in risk and compliance, underwriting roles at multiple acquiring organizations before coming here as a consultant at Infinicept, both at Chase Payment Tech and FIS, previously WorldPay, or maybe now again WorldPay, serving in a credit and risk director role over payment facilitators, aggregating entities, and those sort of businesses, standing up operations to oversee and manage those portfolios. That's my little blurb for myself down at the bottom. Who are the important people at Infinicept? Well, it's Dina Rich and Todd Ablowitz, who have decades in the industry. One from more of a go-to-market side with Todd, and one from more of a, again, risk, compliance, regulatory side of things in Dina, both being ETA members and really foundational pieces of the payment facilitator industry. I won't go too much farther than that. If you want more information, I'm sure you can find all of us on LinkedIn, should you so choose. But why are we here really? To discuss fitness reviews and the needs for them. Really driven out of the idea that payments is a ever-changing environment. Never sits still. There's always a card brand that's changing its rules. There's a regulator that's coming in and demanding certain things, or choosing to view a business vertical as being more risky or needing more control or what have you. So nothing ever stands still, right? In addition to that, your internal policies and procedures need to be updated and reviewed on a regular basis. If you're a payment facilitator or an ISO, you're going to want to present to your sponsor updated documents on an annual basis. Certainly, if you're a bank or an acquirer, that's a standard internal control mechanism, right? Where you're reviewing your internal documents and having them signed off on at an executive level on a regular, usually annual basis. So keeping your internal processes in alignment with all of those changes is extremely important. But it's not just those internal changes that need to be updated and accounted for. It's the fact that there are numerous outside parties who are going to be subjecting you to audits, to reviews themselves. Could be your own internal anti-money laundering review. As a PF or an ISO, you're not a registered financial institution, but your acquirer is probably going to want to make sure that you understand at least pillars of AML operations, that you're conducting an ongoing review, looking for gaps in your money laundering identification efforts. Certainly the card brands can come in and require review of your operations. Your acquirer is going to, hopefully, if they're compliant, conducting a periodic review on you as a ISO or a payment facilitator. Outside governmental bodies, FFIEC, OCC might conduct a review, and certainly states, right? So in order to meet the needs or meet the requirements of those various reviews that you could be subject to, you must update and understand where the changes in the industry are occurring. But it's not just those audits that benefit from internal reviews or fitness reviews, operational improvement reviews, if you will. You can drive investor confidence with a quality review of your operations. In order to get investors, in order to have confidence from the market itself, knowing that you're well managed, knowing that you're seeking outside counsel or outside review of your operations can drive that sort of investor or outside confidence. In the marketplace, whether that's consumers, whether that's businesses, whether that's if you're seeking a relationship with an acquirer, you're going to build your reputation engender trust with those outside parties if you can show that you are subject to constantly updating and improving your operations. You're going to identify risks that you might have overlooked when you set up your operations in the first place, or that you might have missed as changes in the industry have gone on. Right? If your peers are all doing something different and you're not reviewing your operations, you might miss out on what the changes in the wider industry have been. If you're entering new markets, this is a particularly relevant one, specifically in regards here, if I take an example, if you choose to enter a higher risk line of business, the card brands themselves are going to demand that you have an outside party come and examine your operations before you're allowed to enter those higher risk businesses. So from two perspectives here, if you're a PF or an ISO, to be registered as a high risk payment facilitator or high risk ISO, you're going to have to undergo that review to get yourself registered as a high risk payment facilitator or high risk ISO. If you're an acquirer or a bank, you have to undergo that sort of examination in order to get permission to support high risk PFs or high risk ISO. So from both aspects, if you're entering certain lines of business, you're going to be required to undergo these reviews. And lastly, if you're seeking to make sure that you're in alignment with regulatory bodies, federal or state governments, you should be undergoing a regular review cycle. Unfortunately, in a number of instances over recent years, you've seen a number of fintechs be subject to substantial fines due to lax controls. Won't go through all of these in detail, just mentioning a couple of them that are particularly relevant. SoFi, back in 2018, received a $1.8 million fine from the SEC because they didn't have sufficient fraud controls, right? That's something that Infinicept is particularly well positioned to assess, given that we've conducted these reviews across the globe under the auspices of the card brands, under the idea that we are looking for transactional fraud within large aggregating payments organizations. Second example, again, lax risk controls again in OnDeck. And that was at a much lower level than the federal government, right? This one was from the New York Department of Financial Services. So you can see that it's not just federal regulators that can come in and begin assessing fines on fintechs. It goes all the way down to state or even perhaps here at the municipal level that can begin conducting reviews and assessing fines on organizations when their internal controls are insufficient. So you might ask, well, why should I go with Infinicept, right? There's lots of companies out there that can do reviews and assessments, and we've seen them, we run into them all the time. You know, you think of the major auditing firms out there that we're probably all familiar with. I've seen numerous versions of their audits and their reviews of fintechs, and in our opinion, perhaps a bit biased, but they are not typically best to answer your payments issues or to provide feedback on bettering your payments operations. Largely, they end up focused on financial controls, looking at control over how you do your internal financial reporting, accounting focused. Well, these accounting audit type firms are not best to get answers on the appropriate nature of your payments program. They are not payments people. They don't understand card brand rules. They don't look at your business from a transactional, card-based transactional perspective. They don't dig deep into your payments functions. They're unlikely to uncover those true payments issues. And certainly they won't know, because they aren't involved in the payments industry, They won't know what your peers are doing. They won't know what the industry trends typically are. They won't know the gray areas around card brand rules and requirements. When the card brands say something, they might leave a little room for you to operate within. Well, these accounting type firms that are performing audits aren't going to know the nuances of the gray areas in the rules that a payments company operates in. So not always best to select the high profile 3-letter name auditing firms that many of us might be familiar with. Whatever your perspective is, be that from a startup fintech, an established payment facilitator, a burgeoning acquirer looking to stand up an acquiring program and begin sponsoring these type of entities, we've got you covered. We've shepherded numerous independent software vendors from being that nascent startup fintech type firm into taking ownership of their payments and bringing them forward into being registered as a fully blown payment facilitator. ISOs, we've helped balance their requirements between what they can do and what they must do, right? Because as an ISO, you have many different flavors of operating as an ISO. On one end, you have the pure retail ISO, who's just a referral source. And on the other end, you have the industry term of wholesale ISO, which isn't really a defined term by the card brands. You have those type of entities who have a great deal of responsibility and ownership of the payments process. Where in that path of very limited to very expansive do you fit as an operation, as an ISO? And what does that mean for what you're responsible for? Seen many of those type of relationships and made recommendations on how they should operate. Certainly from a bank and acquirer perspective, we've gone through a number of relationships where we've helped them stand up their own program, where they haven't been supporting ISOs, haven't been supporting payment facilitators, and didn't know what they should do from an oversight perspective. How heavy-handed should they be in auditing and overseeing the day-to-day operations of these third parties that they're going to sponsor, and still maintain compliance with the card brand rules. Shepherded, again, if you will, a number of banks and acquirers through that process, or help them obtain their high risk license from the card brands in order to support higher risk lines of business as well. Our expertise and experience isn't limited to just one card brand, one acquirer, one regulatory body's perspective. Given Dina, myself, and Todd's experience, we've dealt with all of them, leveraging card scheme rules in our own internal library of policies and procedures. We can combine that with our previous experience in dealing with sponsors around the globe to really get you a global perspective on both what is required and what best practices are for your organization. At the end of any fitness review, you want to know what's going to be delivered and what are you going to get out of all of this. Well, it is a full life cycle end-to-end assessment of your payments operations, right? Everything from the resources, human or otherwise, that you have on hand, the tools that you might be using to do underwriting, risk management, settlement, so on, integrations that you have. Certainly the policies and procedures, the written word that you must follow is part and parcel to that examination. Helping you stay ahead of your peers, being aware of where the industry is going, what tools might be coming more commonplace or now becoming table stakes in the industry versus ones that are nice to haves or something that you might look to obtain to take a great leap forward in your operations. Our streamlined process, proven process, having conducted scores of these at this point, has really defined and brought us to a structured version of how we go about this, right? It's proven, it's comprehensive in nature. It's going to uncover what the gaps are in your controls, in your program, and allow you to make decisions, right? It's not generalized information. It's specific, it's granular in nature, so that you can make actual changes to your operations that improve things on a day-to-day basis. This comes with a plan and options with Infinicept able to help with some of those corrections, whether that is bringing in an outside third party to plug something that we don't provide a solution to. If the problem is that your merchant contracts are not up to snuff, or they don't contain the language that is required by the card brands or that is common in the industry, we have numerous contacts within attorneys that will have a great deal of experience in crafting sub-merchant agreements or merchant agreements, and be able to bring them in contact with you, as an example, for one. On the other hand, if it's a matter of you don't have your own internal risk policies for identifying certain transaction events, we can build that ourselves. And so either way, we have you covered, right? We can either bring in an outside third party where we don't carry the expertise necessary to provide an answer, or we can help build those functions internally ourselves. The method by which we get to there, again, fairly standardized. If we're assuming here that we're still in a fairly COVID-ish world, and we're doing these things remotely, this is largely what it looks like. When we first engage with you, we request a whole series of documents and pieces of information, right? We want to know what you're doing today. We want to know what vendors you have, what systems you're utilizing today, so we can understand the full gamut of your operations. We also do this so that when we make recommendations on corrections, we don't come to you with a solution for something that you already have. We don't want to rebuild what your functions are. Our job is not to replace what you're doing today. Our job is to, if necessary, supplant or fill gaps or plug holes where they might exist. So if we don't understand how you're operating today, we can't possibly point out where you might find value in certain additions or certain changes. Beyond just those documents and requests for information, we go through a series of interviews, phone, video, and usually Zoom, with key employees, key stakeholders in the organization. That might be just the, let's call it, director of risk or director of underwriting. Best results are to dive down a bit further and talk to some of the day-to-day operational analysts. The closer we can get to sitting over the shoulder of the employees at your organization and hearing and seeing what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, the better our feedback is going to be. From that, we develop a series of findings, comparing your operations, systems, partners, vendors, and so on to others in the industry, best practices within the industry, and coming up with a presentation, right? A list of what we found initially. We usually have a back and forth discussion with your organization to make sure that we haven't missed anything. Because this is a fairly in-depth, extensive process, we don't immediately assume that we know everything about your organization. So certainly if we give you an initial, let's call it draft report on our findings, we want you to have the opportunity to respond to us and say, Dan, we hear what you're saying here, but we actually have this other process separately that covers that we didn't make you aware of, or that you didn't capture in your initial findings. We have a bit of back and forth discussion to make sure that we're both on the same page. Before we get to this number 4, findings presented as an executive overview, right? Basically 2 different sets of findings. One being very granular, a checkbox sort of grocery list, list of findings, recommendations that we present to you, as well as an executive level deck that is more presentable to the higher levels of your organization, so that the executives in your company can get an idea of the general tone and tenor of what the gaps or failures, if they exist, might be, right? People at that level don't necessarily need to know, well, you weren't collecting a tax ID or you weren't performing website reviews. What they need to know is the underwriting process was not up to the standards that the card brands would require, right? So a little bit of a difference between the presentations that we make, one at an executive level so they can understand what's going on, and two, a more granular checklist type of documentation, so that when fixes or changes are implemented, you can essentially go right down and see where you stand. Once that's been accepted, we can have discussion about action plans and next steps, right? Again, like I said on the prior page, we can do our own assistance in helping craft some of the changes. Example, if you don't have sufficient headcount within your organization to perform underwriting or to perform risk, we certainly can participate in any employee reviews, hiring processes. We've done our own interviews with employees as organizations have sought to bring on particular subject matter experts to fill a role or fill a gap at an organization based upon our history. Happy to do things like that. Those are all things that we can talk about doing when we come out of those action plans. What's the length of time that a process like this takes? These are generalities, but they're fair in nature, right? That document collection we talked about, those initial Zoom type interviews, usually 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. We might have undersold it here by a week or so in saying 2 weeks. The comparison of that information usually takes about 2 weeks, and then the creation of those executive and granular level readouts takes about another week. All involving all the way through whatever key members of your organization that you wish to make available to us. Typically, it's people from sales, underwriting, risk, compliance, and settlement. Those are the core functions or core elements of what we're seeking to review here. Other items here are largely a further description of what we talked about in the prior pages. The one item here that's a little bit of an addition is that Q&A part, right? We want to make it open to discussion, particularly that executive level deck or series of findings. If desired, we are happy to present that executive level deck to that audience so that they get the opportunity to ask questions about things like, well, why do you think that, as an example, our underwriting program has not set up the proper controls in place? What vendors might you suggest that we put in place to monitor transactions appropriately? At least allowing them to delve a bit deeper. We don't want them doing that by email or that sort of communication. Giving them a first-person perspective of talking to the people who've actually done the assessment is key to what we want to offer as well. So what should you go away feeling like you'll get out of an engagement with Infinicept of this nature? Detailed and actionable information, right? That checklist we've talked about, being able to track it, those items being broken out, right? They're not just general findings. They're identified as being driven by a particular party. Is it driven by a brand? Is it driven by a regulator? Or is it simply not a particular gap in your program, but is it just out of alignment with industry best practices or what we know your peers are doing? You'll get that sort of information so that you can make the business decision on where to prioritize certain items. Yes, we'll make recommendations on areas where you might be able to streamline processes, or you might be able to swap one vendor for another, whether it's because of capability, whether it's because of pricing. We want to put you in the best position to compete with your peers. And certainly, as an endpoint, we want to provide you warnings on any rule shortcomings, anywhere where you are putting your organization at risk by not completing a certain process or function. Those would be highlighted, detailed. We'll have particularly pointed discussions with your executive team as necessary if those items come up, because those should be recognized early and be top of mind when it comes to any remediation. So with that, that was just a quick overview of our fitness review process. I want to thank you all for attending. I hope that provided a little bit of information about what we offer from a fitness review or a operational improvement process. Happy to engage with any of you at any time in discussing this further or going deeper. Short 25-minute call doesn't get to all the nuances that might want to be answered for you. So let us know, reach out, give us a call, and we'll be happy to engage. Thank you very much, and hope you have a pleasant day.